last Sunday. Seems like only yesterday, doesn't it? I was privileged to participate and to baptize Owen Seaver as part of a bigger baptismal service after the Free Life service on Sunday. And I promised you we'd show a video, so here's the video of Owen being baptized. Okay, Owen, come on in. Now, Owen grew up in my church here at the Fountain, and his family has a long history. As you all know, Rick and Letty and all of their kids. But Owen's the oldest, and he's grown into a really wonderful young man. And it's my privilege today to participate in this. I just want to ask you, Owen, do you, in front of all these people, confess your faith in Jesus Christ? And put your whole trust in Him? And will you promise to follow His teachings as revealed in the Old and New Testaments of the Bible? He's saying yes, by the way, in case a little soft-spoken. All right, so, and do you want to be baptized? Okay, because this is too small for swimming. So turn around. Cross your hands over your chest. I'm going to hold your nose. I'm going to lean you backwards into the water. Okay, you ready? Here we go. Owen, Charles, I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. The newest child of God, right here. All right. A little chilly, but thank God for you who planned to put a hot water heater right here with a bib for the hose that we can drag out there and fill that thing with hot water, because, ooh, that would have been cold otherwise. All right. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you for our special guest today. We don't have our guest of honor today for some reason. I thought she was going to join us today for worship, but anyway, we're together, and it's good to be together. Most of us were raised by our parents to be self-sufficient. We were taught to take care of ourselves, to fend for ourselves. And when push comes to shove, we learn that we can't trust anyone but ourselves. But at the same time, our culture tells us that there are many things and many people we can trust and we should trust, that a myriad of products and politicians are worthy of our trust and allegiance, and that we can't rely just on ourselves, because we are too easily persuaded by misinformation, wielded by bad characters with an evil agenda. We need the assistance, so this theory goes, of fact-checkers and experts who can hold our hands and steer us in the right direction. Now, each of these ideas are partially right. We do need to depend on ourselves and have some independence in order to be healthy, emotionally and otherwise. And we do need others. We cannot survive the world in isolation. But both of these thoughts are also wrong, because they fail to convey this essential truth, that ultimately God is the only one we can fully trust and rely on. Here again, these words from Psalm 62. For God alone my soul waits in silence, for my hope is from Him. He alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall not be shaken. On God rests my deliverance and my honor. My mighty rock, my refuge is in God. Trust in Him at all times, O people. Pour out your heart before Him. God is a refuge for us. Those of low estate are but a breath. Those of high estate are a delusion. In the balances they go up. They are together lighter than a breath. Put no confidence in extortion, and set no vain hopes on robbery. If riches increase, do not set your heart on them. Once God has spoken, twice have I heard this, that power belongs to God. and steadfast love belongs to you, O Lord, for you repay to all according to their work. Now, the psalmist, who is David, warns us that it is foolish to trust in humans. Not that we shouldn't trust in those we have found to be trustworthy, such as our spouse or our best friend, etc., but even they might disappoint or betray. David tells us that humans, both of high position and of low position, cannot be ultimately trusted. People are nothing but a breath, so insignificant that if weighed, the scales would not even move. Their might is powerless before God. And something to remember, each of us is human. That means we cannot ultimately trust our own reasoning or our own thoughts and plans, just as we cannot ultimately trust others, so others cannot ultimately trust us. And we cannot trust ourselves. We can only trust in God, finally, ultimately, completely. Verse 8 in Psalm 62 says, "Trust in God at all times, O people. Pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us." God is the only one who will never let us down. He is the only one on whom we can always rely. Hundreds of voices cry out for our allegiance and loyalty. Voices from our devices, our phones and computers, voices from TV and movies, voices from friends and neighbors, even voices from within, influenced or encouraged by the enemy of our souls. But only one voice is trustworthy all the time. Verse 5 of Psalm 62 says, "For God alone my soul waits in silence, for my hope is from him." So how do we navigate this? How do we trust in God alone? How do we listen to our trusted friends and to our own hearts, but yet trust in God alone? We have to learn to recognize God's voice so that in everything we can filter out the noise and focus on his voice. In order to recognize God's voice, we have to spend time with him. We have to discipline our lives so that we are used to hearing God and heeding his voice. That means spending time in the Word. It means spending time in prayer, and not just speaking, but most especially listening in prayer. Jesus said it in John 10, verse 27, "My sheep hear my voice. I know them, and they follow me." So we take input from others and from our surroundings, but we weigh those things against what we hear from God. And our ultimate trust is in God alone. Our Wesleyan heritage gives us some mighty tools to learn how to hear from God. Class meetings, what we call life groups here at the Fount, provide a small group of trusted fellow believers against whom we can bounce what we're hearing from God and from others to help us discern direction for our lives. Band meetings, what we call discipleship groups, provide an even deeper accountability with a smaller, more intimate fellowship who know us well and love us deeply. And our society meetings, our worship together, provides us with solid teaching from the Word and meaningful worship experience that move us closer to God. Add to that our private prayer times, prayer groups, and other discipleship activities, and we have the tools to learn how to trust in God alone. Having the foundation of God's direction in our lives, we can take in other influences and give them their proper priority, while trusting in God alone for our ultimate authority. Because these other voices are actively working, in some cases, to dissuade us from trusting in God alone, one of the most powerful voices working against us is our natural love of money and power. And I say natural in the sense of fleshly, sinful. Paul reminds us in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, and in their eagerness to be rich, some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pains." And the writer of the book of Hebrews counsels us to keep our lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. That promise to never leave you or forsake you is key to trusting God alone. Others may promise to never leave you, but we know that their promises are limited. People move on. People die. People change their minds. God never does. God's voice sometimes seems to go silent, but that is more our perception than it is God's action. And if he does go silent, it is only for a time and only because he has something greater for us. And even if we can't hear God's voice, we always have the Word, and God always speaks through his Word. Verse 5, chapter 62, again. For God alone my soul waits in silence, for my hope is from him. Why silence? Why silence? Because sometimes God's voice is very quiet, still, small. Sometimes it's hard to hear God because the noise of our lives and of the world around us overshadow his voice. So we need to wait in silence. Psalm 131 speaks to this. It says, O Lord, my heart is not lifted up, my eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things too great and too marvelous for me, but I have calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with his mother. My soul is like the weaned child that is with me. It is most often in the silence that we hear God. That was Elijah's experience when he met God on Mount Horeb when he was running away from Jezebel. He was perhaps expecting God to speak to him in grandiose ways with fireworks and spectacular special effects, but that was not how God chose to speak to him. Listen again to 1 Kings 19, verses 11 through 13. He said, Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him that said, What are you doing here, Elijah? The Lord spoke to Elijah out of the sheer silence, or how the King James Version puts it, a still small voice. If we're going to trust in God alone, we have to learn how to filter out the noise and the clamoring voices and to listen for God's voice. And we can help each other to do this. The combined experiences within the body of Christ, the church, is a rich resource. When we share our experiences and learnings with each other, we multiply them. If we try to go it alone, trying to follow Jesus by ourselves, we can easily get lost. Oh, I know, people will say, but I have Jesus, I don't need anyone else. But it is Jesus himself who says in John chapter 13, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. Because we know that when the Bible speaks of love, it isn't a feeling, it is action. How can we love in the action sense? How can we love one another if we're not together? Jesus designed the church to be an assembly together. Those who insist on following Jesus by themselves are missing the whole point and missing out on the true richness that Jesus intended. Insofar as we help one another to hear God's voice and heed it, our influence on one another is good and holy. Let's review. Our parents taught us to rely on ourselves and to be self-sufficient. Our culture teaches us to listen to various voices and to avail ourselves of things. But the Word of God tells us to trust in God alone, listening for his still small voice and heeding it. We filter our own thoughts and the voices of those around us through the Word, and we know that God has said and continues to say through that Word. And we finally, ultimately, trust in God alone, who is our refuge and strength. Now let us spend a few moments in prayerful reflection as we consider what God may be saying to us today.